Imagine for a moment that you are not the thinker behind your thoughts, but the field through which thought itself passes. Imagine that beneath all your effort, confusion, and identity, there is a radiant stillness and intelligence so vast and quiet it doesn't need to shout to be true. It simply is. As Ernest Holmes once taught, you are not just a person trying to connect with God. You are a place where God expresses through mind, word, and form. There is no gap, no delay, no condition. So, before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. Now listen closely. What breathes you is not your lungs. What moves you is not your willpower. What thinks through you is not your brain. These are the instruments. But the source, the real power, is the mind behind the mind, the light that lives not beside you, but as you. This light isn't visible, but it is knowable. It's not intellectual, but it is intelligent. It doesn't arrive with emotion, though it carries a deep peace when felt. It is the I am that existed before any concept of self could limit it. When you speak of me, you're often referring to layers: personality, memory, emotion, name, need. But beneath all of that is awareness itself, the sacred field, the silent pulse of the divine. And that awareness doesn't have to become spiritual. It already is. It simply waits for you to stop pretending to be separate. What Holmes pointed to what all true metaphysical teachers affirm us, that the only distance between you and God is a thought, not even a big one, a tiny veil, a misidentified echo, a moment of forgetting that assumes the source is out there instead of always here. There's nothing external to become. The light doesn't ask you to be worthy of it. It only asks that you become available, that you stop identifying with limitation, and remember, thought is not a private function. It's participation in the creative mind itself. Right now, this very moment, you are participating in divine intelligence. Not symbolically, not metaphorically. Actually, every single thought you dwell in impresses the law, which responds automatically not because it's moral or emotional, but because it's exact, like gravity, like magnetism, like light. The law doesn't wonder what you meant to say with your energy. It receives your vibration exactly as you live it. This is not to scare you, it's to liberate you, because it means you are never stuck. You are never fated. You are never at the mercy of the outer world. If you are truly an expression of God-mind, then you carry within you the power to change everything, not by forcing the world to change, but by changing your position within it. That's the secret Holmes was always pointing to. The universe doesn't reward effort, it reflects alignment. And that alignment doesn't start with frantic action. It starts with inner clarity, with the decision to stop thinking about life and start thinking with life. Letting the light think through you doesn't mean giving up your mind. It means remembering whose mind you're using. It's not about control, it's about consent. Will you let intelligence lead? Will you trust the pattern that sustains stars and breathes oceans to also organize your path? Because it will. It already is. But your awareness of that truth determines how clearly it expresses through you. This is not mysticism. This is spiritual physics. And once you stop confusing your life with your circumstances, the veil begins to lift. You realize you're not the storm. You're the sky it moves through. You're not your past. You're the canvas it was painted on. You are not the story. You're the awareness telling it. That shift from personal identification to universal participation is the beginning of spiritual mastery. It's where the panic softens. It's where the noise begins to clear. It's where the I can't dissolves into the steady presence of I am. And from that presence, everything real flows. You don't have to chase your power. You have to remember it. Not because it was lost, but because you were taught to look for it in all the wrong places. Outside yourself, in praise, in certainty, in formulas, in approval. But all along, it was already speaking through your breath, your silence, your persistent knowing that something more was possible. You were never meant to think alone. The light is with you, thinking through you, always. You were never meant to manifest from strain. what you've called effort grinding, hustling, richingus, often the echo of a consciousness trying to create from ego, not alignment. It's not that you don't want growth or progress. Of course you do. But when desire is filtered through separation, even the most sacred goals become burdens. You are not here to create from scratch. You are here to co-create with a mind that already knows how. The universal mind doesn't guess. It doesn't hope. It doesn't ask for more proof. It knows, and when your mind tunes to that knowing, when it quiets the drama and drops beneath the noise, then the power flows, not in fits, not in flashes, but in a steady, consistent current of realization. Ernest Holmes never preached a gospel of hard willpower. He spoke instead of divine cooperation, the idea that there's a universal pattern of wholeness, love, and harmony that's already present in your job is not to invent it but to sync with it. Like turning the dial of a radio, your inner attention either tunes in or introduces static. So many try to think their way into abundance while still believing they're broken. They affirm, "I receive," while internally clenching against disappointment. That split between outer declaration and inner belief is what creates the drag. You're not punished for it, but the law responds to it precisely, not to your words, but to your vibration, to your deep consent or resistance. And this is why personal power, while admirable, is not sustainable. It can only take you so far. Eventually, your strength wears thin, your strategies collapse, and you're left staring at the truth. Only God, power, holds. This doesn't mean you surrender into passivity. Quite the opposite. It means your action becomes fueled by intelligence, not anxiety. You move, speak, and create from a still center, not a frantic edge. You stop overfunctioning. You start listening. And from that stillness, clarity rises not always with fireworks, but with a grounded knowing that feels unshakable, even if nothing around you has changed yet. This is the genius of universal mind. It doesn't need time to prepare or permission to move. It's always ready, always present, but it will not push past your mental atmosphere. It will never override your consciousness. It waits for your alignment. So if your life feels like a constant push, ask, am I thinking with the creative Mindor against it? The ego is always in a rush. The spirit is never late. The ego seeks proof before peace. The spirit is peace, and from that peace comes power. You weren't designed to strive your way into truth. You were made to relax into it, to remember it, to let it speak in you, and as you. That's why Holmes emphasized again and again that the truth you seek is not external, it is principle, and principle is unchanging. It doesn't respond to moods. It responds to consciousness. So take inventory. What are you really leaning on? Your personality or your presence? Your cleverness or your connection? One burns out. The other never will. When you rely on the universal mind, things begin to shift, not always immediately, but inevitably, because you're no longer fueling outcomes with resistance. You're creating from coherence, from congruence, from unity with the law. And that unity is not reserved for saints or mystics. It's not a reward for long suffering or years of practice. It's yours right now, the moment you let go of thinking that you're on your own. You never were. Even now, as you listen, that mind is thinking through you, quietly, clearly, not in force, but in flow. And the more you surrender to its rhythm, the more effortless your path becomes, not because nothing challenges you, but because you no longer challenge the flow. This is what it means to live from universal mind. Not that you avoid the work, but that the work becomes infused with ease, with insight, with guidance that doesn't shout, but leads. You still act, but your action is no longer reaction. It's response. It's resonance. And that resonance becomes your compass. You no longer need to over-explain, overthink, or overpower. You listen, you trust, you align. And from that alignment, life begins to organize itself around your clarity. It's not magic, it's law. And that law is working now. You've been taught to believe that the world happens to you, that your life is the result of external events, inherited patterns, unpredictable forces outside your control. And so, for years, maybe decades, you've tried to fix the outer world to feel better within. You've adjusted jobs, relationships, diets, affirmations, habits. But still, something in you whispers, there must be more. There is. The more is this. Consciousness is cause, not reaction, not effect, cause. That is the foundational key to spiritual freedom. Until you embrace this not as philosophy, but as function, your life will feel chaotic, uncertain, and driven by things beyond your command. But once you begin to live from this principle, you no longer fight against circumstances, you shape them. Ernest Holmes didn't ask us to wish for a better life. He challenged us to think from the consciousness of truth, knowing that form must follow idea, that what you repeatedly dwell upon becomes clothed in reality, not by mystical chance, but by the most orderly, dependable law in existence. Thought is not inert, it is creative. And when backed by feeling, it becomes the blueprint by which all manifestation takes place. This means that your circumstances are never permanent. They're simply the evidence of prior states of mind, nothing more. What you're living now is the residue of earlier beliefs, ideas, and emotional investments. If you want to shift what's showing up, don't fight the current results. Go deeper. Ask, what belief made this seem possible? Then go even deeper. Is that belief still welcome here? Because until you change the structure of your consciousness, no surface change will hold. You'll find yourself repeating patterns, no matter how different the people or settings. It's not karma. It's not punishment. It's pattern. And the beautiful news is, patterns can be dissolved not by force, but by replacement. Holmes knew this. He taught that if we plant a new idea in receptive soil, meaning in a mind ready to truly let go of the old, then the law must respond. There is no delay, no bias, no favoritism. It works by alignment. If your belief is strong, your feeling is clear, and your image is consistent, the outer world has no choice but to conform. That's not wishful thinking. That's spiritual causation. But that level of causation requires something from you. Responsibility. It's easier to blame the economy, your upbringing, your partner, your history. And for a while, that might even feel comforting. But it's also disempowering. Because if someone else created your suffering, then only they can remove it. And that makes you a prisoner of your environment. The law offers something better: sovereignty. You don't have to wait for others to behave differently. You only need to change the mental equivalent you're holding, what you believe you deserve, what you accept as possible, what you unconsciously rehearse when you're alone with your thoughts. Because it's that inner atmosphere that sets the tone for your life, not the mood you show others, not the script you say out loud, but the real tone, the emotional frequency that you live inside, even when no one is watching. And that tone teaches the law exactly what to return. So if your life feels stuck or repetitive, don't panic. Don't moralize it. Just realize it's showing you the structure of your inner world, and structures can change. Start there, not with blame, but with observation. Track the thoughts you've been feeding. Watch the emotional climate you walk in. And when you see the patterns, interrupt them not with force, but with truth, with a quiet inner statement. This no longer serves me. I choose again. That choosing is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as subtle as stopping mid-thought and saying, "Number, I don't think from fear anymore. I choose peace." And then staying with that peace long enough to impress a new groove into consciousness. This is not overnight magic, but it is inevitable law. What you impress must express. Let that empower you. You are not a product of fate. You are an expression of mind. And that mind, when clear, becomes a cause so powerful that the world around you begins to change, not because you manipulated it, but because you showed up with a new internal order. That is true creation. That is divine mind, thinking as you. There is no force, more processor, more impersonal than the law of mind. It doesn't respond to your intentions, your willpower, or your vocabulary. It responds to your state, your inner agreement with what you believe is true. It doesn't decide whether your thought is good or bad, right or wrong, fair or unjust. It simply reflects. Ernest Holmes said clearly, "The law does not react, it responds." That distinction is everything. When you react to life, you're operating from emotion, from pattern, from unresolved noise. When the law responds, it does so with exactitude, no extra, no less. It mirrors the vibration you hold, not just the words you speak, but the depth of the belief behind them. This is why affirmations don't always work. If you're saying, "I am whole," while secretly believing you're broken, the law doesn't hear your words, it hears your vibration of lack. It feels the doubt behind the mask. It reflects the true energy of your inner stance. And this isn't punishment, it's precision. The universe isn't cruel, it's exact. It gives you what you align with. So when you begin to understand this, everything shifts. You stop trying to convince God or earn outcomes. You realize, I only need to become inwardly clear. I only need to choose again. Let go of the idea that the law is emotional. It isn't. It doesn't favor anyone. It doesn't weigh your past. It doesn't balance your wins and losses. It works according to alignment, and alignment is available to you now. You don't need to get more spiritual for the law to function. You don't need to study more books, burn more sage, or reach a certain vibration. You only need to become congruent in thought, feeling, and belief. When you do, the law moves. The moment your inner atmosphere shifts, you initiate a new cause. And that cause has to express, because that's what law does. It outpictures consciousness, always. Now, most people live in what Holmes would call unconscious creation. They don't realize that their constant dwelling in fear, anger, doubt, or resistance is creating a magnetic field around them. They think they're victims of circumstance, when in fact they're receivers of reflection. They expect change without inner clarity. But the law doesn't respond to hope, it responds to certainty. That's why true transformation begins not with striving, but with awareness. What have you been rehearsing in your mind? What outcomes have you been pre-living through worry or expectation? What story are you telling in the silence between your actions? Because the law listens to all of it. It's not waiting for your ritual. It's responding to your inner rehearsal. So if you want new results, don't start with trying harder. Start with becoming aware. Where is your agreement? What are you actually consenting to believe? Because every time you say yes internally to an idea, whether empowering or limiting you, give it creative authority. This is the spiritual responsibility Holmes invites us into. Not guilt, not striving. Responsibility. The power to stop outsourcing your peace to circumstance. The authority to shape your own atmosphere through conscious thought. And once you step into that, once you stop reacting to the mirror and start adjusting what's in front of it, you become free. Not free from challenge, but free from powerlessness. That's what this path offers. Not a life without problems, but a life where your response becomes conscious, where your energy is no longer dictated by what others do, say, or fail to understand. You start to live from within, and that inner life becomes the cause of the outer. The law doesn't need convincing, it needs coherence. When you become one with the thought you hold, when your inner belief, emotion, and image all say yes, then the law doesn't hesitate. It moves. Not to reward you, but because you've met the condition of manifestation, alignment. So pause not in silence, but in attention. Check in. What are you living inside? What is your inner posture? Because whatever that is, the law is echoing it right now. If you're tired of waiting, stop waiting. Begin impressing a new tone. Think not from the surface, but from the depth, from the part of you that already knows. The part of you that is made of clarity, not confusion, that lives in power, not panic. The law is waiting not because it's reluctant, but because it's precise. Let it meet the truth in you, not your mask, not your desperation, but your grounded yes. And then watch what unfolds. You've likely been taught that your thoughts create your reality, and that's true. But thought alone is not enough. Without feeling, thought is like a seed on dry ground. It holds potential, but it has no life force. The law responds not only to the image you hold, but to the emotional frequency you carry. The feeling gives it weight, shape, and magnetic pull. This is where many well-intentioned seekers falter. They say the right words, visualize the ideal outcomes, rehearse success in their mind, but all the while, they feel uncertainty, fear, doubt, or resentment underneath. And it's that undercurrent the law reflects. The law doesn't hear the script, it reads the signal. Ernest Holmes was clear. The universal mind doesn't distinguish between a joyful thought and a fearful one. It simply receives what you dwell on and magnifies it. That means your dominant feeling not, your fleeting moods, but your chronic tone sets the course of your life. This doesn't mean you need to force yourself into artificial happiness. The law doesn't need performance, it needs congruence. You can't bypass your real emotions by layering positive thinking over unresolved pain. That's not faith, that's denial. What transforms reality is not pretending, but shifting into genuine inner coherence, a place where your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs agree. This kind of inner unity has power not because you've manipulated energy, but because you've removed resistance. When your heart and mind walk in the same direction, the way forward clears. You're no longer divided, you're no longer sending mixed signals, and the law finally has a clear blueprint to follow. To be spiritually responsible is to watch your signal. Not obsessively, not with guilt, but with honest attention. Ask, does this thought carry the tone of trust or worry? Does this emotion reflect openness or defense? Does this frequency match the world I say I want? If not, don't scold yourself. Don't retreat into shame. Simply adjust. Drop the thought. Choose again. You are not your fear. You are the awareness of it. And that awareness has creative choice. When you stop fueling misaligned thoughts with emotion, they dissolve. They lose form. They return to nothingness. That's not spiritual bypassing, that's clarity. The mind creates, but the heart charges. It's the charge that activates the outcome. This is why Holmes emphasized feeling as the secret, long before it became popularized. Because feeling is not the enemy, it's the access point. If thought is the arrow, feeling is the force behind it. And both must align. So, when you affirm a truth like wholeness, abundance, love, pause. Let it land in your body. Let it echo in your nervous system. Feel it as already true. That feeling doesn't come from fantasy. It comes from identity, from remembering that you are already one with the source that fulfills. You don't force this. You allow it. You sit in the vibration until it becomes familiar. You hold it not as performance, but as presence. And over time, the outer world must catch up to the inner reality. This is not a technique, it's a state of being. And that state is always available and because life has calmed down, but because you've chosen to rise above conditions. You're no longer waiting for evidence to believe. You believe, and the evidence begins to shift. This is not delusion, it's alignment. And in alignment, the delay ends. The law doesn't require perfect thinking. It requires consistent signal. It's your repeated tone that becomes the mold for reality. So don't aim for flawless thoughts. Aim for steady atmosphere. That's what builds the field. Every time you return to clarity, you reinforce a new pattern. Every time you stay with a high-frequency idea, you begin to override the low. The shift may be subtle at first, but eventually, it becomes the dominant signal and the outer world reorganizes itself accordingly. Not because you fought it, because you led it from within. At some point in your journey, you were convinced you were separate. Separate from source, separate from peace, separate from the answers you seek. It may not have been said outright, but it was implied through religion, through culture, through family systems that taught you to reach outside yourself for truth, salvation, or permission. But what if separation was never real? What if it's only a thought we inherited and never examined? Ernest Holmes never taught that you had to climb your way back to God. He reminded us that the divine is not distant, it is the very intelligence animating your being. Not watching you from above, but expressing itself through you. The only veil is belief, and that veil can be lifted not with effort, but with recognition. You are not disconnected, you're distracted. You've been living inside the noise of a false self-image, the one who lacks, the one who needs fixing, the one who's behind. But that image is not you. It's a projection built on forgetfulness. The moment you stop reinforcing that projection, your real nature begins to shine through, not because it was missing, but because your attention was elsewhere. Separation is a hypnotic idea. It keeps you striving, explaining, fixing, comparing. It makes you believe that clarity, power, and love are distant things you must earn. But the truth? They are already within you, waiting for recognition. The practice is not about becoming something new. It's about removing what you are not. The fear, the judgment, the over-identification with the body and personality, these are not your essence. They are experiences moving through you, not truths defining you. When Holmes spoke of the one mind, he didn't mean a vague cloud of energy. He meant a living, infinite intelligence in which you exist right now, not beside it, not in service to it, in it. You are made of the same substance as the sun, the stars, the breath that moves the ocean. You are not a visitor here. You are an expression of this mind in human form. To live in this truth is not arrogance. It's humility of the highest order. You stop pretending to be the source of your strength. You begin to listen, to follow, not force. And that listening leads you out of the illusion of separation and back into alignment. So if you've been feeling lost, it's not because God left you. It's because your mind wandered from its center. And the moment you bring it back, not through guilt, but through willingness, you return. Just like that. No delay, no penance, just presence. The moment you stop arguing with what is and remember who you are beneath the noise, the light rushes in, not from outside but from within. It was always there, pulsing behind every breath, every heartbeat, every moment you almost gave up and didn't. Because that presence never gave up on you. You don't need to fix your life to feel connected. You need to see through the lie that says you were ever separate. That's all interference is, not punishment. Not a sign that you've failed. Just noise, static. Emotional residue from outdated beliefs and unresolved fears that block the signal of truth already broadcasting within you. Ernest Holmes understood this dynamic. He taught that the law never turns off. Divine mind doesn't stop working just because you feel off, but what changes is the clarity of your transmission. The channel is still open, but the content is being scrambled by inner conflict, guilt, resistance, or unconscious attachment to lack. And here's the twist. You often don't realize it's happening. You'll think, why isn't it working anymore? I was doing all the right things. But beneath the surface you've shifted tone. You've tightened emotionally. You've tried to control the process instead of flowing with it. This doesn't make you bad, it makes you human. But spiritual maturity means recognizing that your results are not random. They are accurate reflections of the signal you're broadcasting, whether consciously or not. So what creates static? Trying to manifest from fear. Repeating affirmations without belief. Obsessing over timing. Clinging to outcomes. Silencing your intuition because it contradicts what your ego wants. These subtle forms of misalignment distort the signal and the law responds accordingly. It's not about being perfect. It's about being clear. The clearer your signal, the cleaner the reflection. And when you feel static, don't panic. Don't double down on effort. That only makes it worse. Instead, pause. Get still. Ask gently, what am I resisting right now? Where am I not telling myself the truth? Because the truth doesn't cause pain, resistance to it does. Once you identify the interference, you reclaim power. You can forgive the fear. You can release the outcome. You can return to coherence. And in that return, the transmission strengthens. The light comes back into focus not because it ever left, but because you cleared the static. Think of it like tuning an old radio. You don't need to build the station. You just need to find the right frequency. And the moment you do, the sound becomes crisp. The signal is strong. The message is unmistakable. That's what happens in consciousness, when you stop arguing with life, when you stop trying to override the deeper knowing inside you and simply trust it. The light thinks through you clearly, constantly, creatively. Your job is to stop clouding it. That's not about being perfect. It's about being available, about choosing to let the noise pass through without clinging to it, about prioritizing inner peace over outer performance, about trusting that when you're clear, creation becomes effortless. And if it's not effortless right now, that's okay. Just check the signal, not with judgment, but with curiosity, with compassion, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing this isn't punishment, it's precision. The law works, always. Your task is to work with it, not against it. So, breathe, soften, and reattune. The broadcast never stopped. You cannot fake alignment. You can speak the words, light the candles, play the music, but if your soul isn't in agreement, the universe doesn't move, not because it withholds, but because you haven't truly opened the channel. Ernest Holmes taught that the law is exact. It mirrors your consciousness, not your outer performance. You can be doing all the right things while holding tightly to fear beneath the surface. You can affirm abundance while rehearsing lack. You can pray for love while vibrating resentment. And the law will give you what you're truly anchored in, not what you pretend to believe. This is not cruelty, this is mercy, because it means the moment you align genuinely, quietly, without fanfare, everything begins to shift. But alignment is not a pose. It's not a moment of spiritual theater. It's not high vibration for the sake of appearance. It's a deep inner click, when your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and identity all say the same thing. Yes, this is who I am now. That shift can be subtle. It may not come with goosebumps or visions, but it's unmistakable. You know it because the grasping stops, the anxiety drains. The impulse to prove, explain, or over-effort dissolves. And what replaces it is a settled authority, a quiet certainty that doesn't need defending. That's alignment. And once you touch it, even briefly, your tolerance for misalignment drops. You can't unknow what it feels like to walk in your power. You can't keep choosing fear once you've tasted real peace. But here's what's key. Alignment doesn't mean you feel perfect. It means you're honest. You stop faking clarity. You stop pushing down the truth in favor of spiritual performance. You sit with the discomfort, not to indulge it, but to clear it, because buried emotion is static. Suppressed fear becomes resistance. And resistance, even in beautiful words, still gets reflected by the law. This is why spiritual bypassing is so tempting and so destructive. It allows you to stay mentally busy while emotionally unavailable. But the law doesn't respond to busyness. It responds to being. And being requires presence. So if something's not working, if your manifestations feel blocked, your inner peace shaky, your life heavy, ask, where am I pretending to be aligned while still living from fear? The answer may sting. That's good. Let it. Because real alignment doesn't come through more effort. It comes through truth-telling. You tell the truth about what you want. You tell the truth about what you fear. You tell the truth about where you're still hiding. And from that raw honesty, something sacred opens. Not dramatic. Not noisy, just real. And when you're real, the law responds immediately. Because now the signal is clean. You're no longer sending mixed frequencies, you're congruent. And congruence is magnetic. So don't rush to fix. Don't rush to manifest. Don't rush to be spiritual. Instead, get honest. Do your words match your energy? Does your desire match your sense of deserving? Does your vision match your identity? If not, begin there. Not with judgment, with awareness. Because you don't get what you say, you get what you are. And the good news? You can always shift what you are, not by pretending, by choosing. The law is listening. Make the signal clean. You've likely felt it, the ache of contradiction. When the life you speak out loud doesn't match the life you feel inside. When you say you trust, but wake with anxiety. When you preach abundance, but make decisions from lack. When your surface sparkles, but your soul is tired. This inner split is not failure, it's feedback. It tells you there's a misalignment between the story you're telling and the vibration you're living, and that tension, the friction between your spoken truth and your embodied truth, isn't meant to shame you. It's meant to wake you. Because you cannot build a life of peace on the foundation of inner conflict. Not because it's morally wrong, but because the law won't support incoherence. Ernest Holmes knew this. He taught that your inner world is not a private place. It is a creative workshop, always broadcasting, always forming the substance of your experience. The law doesn't distinguish between what you confess and what you quietly believe. It simply responds to your total state of consciousness. This is why people sometimes cry, "I've done everything right and nothing is changing." But if you look closely, the signal they're sending is full of contradictions. They visualize abundance but believe they're unworthy. They affirm health while identifying with pain. They pray for love but expect abandonment. The law cannot override your dominant assumption. So the question becomes, what are you assuming day after day, beneath the words? Assumptions don't shout. They whisper. They live in the background. They hide behind language. But they drive your life more than anything you say out loud. And until they are shifted, they become your ceiling. You cannot manifest beyond your self-concept. That's the truth most people avoid, not because they're lazy, but because it asks so much. It asks for deep inner honesty. It demands you let go of the identity built on struggle, defense, and needing to prove your worth. And here's the paradox. That identity served you. It helped you survive, belong, get through the chapters where you didn't yet know who you were. But now, it's too small, it's too heavy, it's too reactive. It blocks the flow of your becoming. You don't need to destroy it. You need to thank it and release it. Because you are not here to stay small for the sake of others. You are not here to carry inherited pain just to prove your loyalty. You are here to embody light, not as a concept, but as a way of being. And that embodiment begins the moment you drop the performance and become willing to live from the inside out. That means asking, if I really believed I was supported, what would I stop doing? If I truly knew I was enough, what mask would I drop? If I trusted the light that thinks through me, what would I finally allow? These questions don't require instant answers. They require willingness. Willingness to be seen without your old armor. Willingness to feel safe in your own skin. Willingness to stop negotiating with your own worth. That's where the real work begins. Not in manifesting new things, but in becoming a new receiver. One who is no longer fragmented, one whose signal is no longer split between desire and doubt. This work is sacred. It's not glamorous. It's not always visible, but it's where miracles are born not from ritual, but from congruence. The law doesn't need your performance. It needs your wholeness. There comes a moment, quiet, clear, unmistakable, when you realize nothing outside you can give you the clarity you've been seeking. Not approval. Not applause, not even well-meaning advice. Because the compass doesn't point out there, it points within. And until you trust that internal compass, life will continue to feel like a moving target. This is what Ernest Holmes meant when he said, "There is something within you that knows." Not intellectually, not theoretically, but directly. That something is the divine intelligence in you, as you. And the moment you stop deferring to outside authority and begin listening inward, your world stabilizes. Not because everything outside becomes perfect, but because you're no longer outsourcing your power. This shift is subtle at first. You'll still find yourself tempted to ask for signs, to scan the room for reassurance, to look to mentors, books, or systems. But little by little, you'll start to feel the contrast, the hollowness of answers that don't match your own inner rhythm. And when that contrast becomes sharp enough, you'll stop running. You'll sit still, breathe, and say, "Okay, I'm listening." That's when the deeper voice speaks. not in thunder, not in drama, but in a tone so still, so steady, it almost feels like your own. That voice doesn't beg, it doesn't argue, it knows. It's the voice that says, go left, not right even, when logic says otherwise. The voice that says, let go now even, when you're still holding on. The voice that says, you are safe even, when nothing around you looks stable. This is not intuition in the pop spirituality sense. This is presence, moving through you as guidance. It doesn't come from your history. It doesn't come from your fear. It comes from the part of you that never separated from God. And once you trust it, truly trust it, you begin to walk in spiritual authority. You no longer require everyone's agreement before you take action. You don't panic when people misunderstand your choices. You don't collapse when plans shift, because your alignment doesn't depend on conditions. It depends on inner coherence. And coherence is quiet. That's why most people miss it. They're waiting for fireworks. They're waiting for certainty to feel dramatic. But in reality, certainty is calm. It doesn't rush. It doesn't chase. It simply knows and moves accordingly. This is why Holmes placed so much emphasis on spiritual independence. Because the moment you make someone else your source, your partner, your paycheck, your teacher, you've forgotten the origin of your own supply. People are channels, circumstances are mirrors, but the source is always within. So when you feel scattered, when your peace depends on how someone else treats you, or what the numbers say, or how fast results arrive, it's a cue. You've drifted outward. No judgment, just return. Not by force, but by remembering. Nothing real can be taken from me, because what's real is already part of me. And from that place, you lead your life with quiet power. You stop chasing. You start magnetizing. You stop negotiating. You start choosing. Because now, you trust the light that thinks through you, not as theory, as lived truth. And that changes everything. There is something undeniable about your presence, whether you realize it or not. Long before your words arrive, long before your choices become visible, people feel you. They feel your tone, your atmosphere, your unspoken rhythm. Not the mask you wear, but the energy you carry. This is not a mystical concept. It's practical. It's the transmission of consciousness in real time. Ernest Holmes knew that consciousness always teaches before the mouth opens. That's why lasting change never begins in strategy, it begins in state. You might think you're hiding your inner world. You're not. You're radiating it. Even when you say all the right things, if you're broadcasting anxiety, people will feel it. If you're pretending confidence while tethered to self-doubt, the room knows. The law knows. And your life reflects not the surface, but the dominant tone within. You don't need to fear this. You need to respect it. Because the moment you accept that your atmosphere precedes you, everything becomes sacred. Every thought, every inner rehearsal, every small act of integrity, it all counts. It all vibrates. It all builds the field that either attracts or repels your becoming. And here's where it gets honest. Sometimes you'll wake up and feel hollow. No spark. No clarity. Just the dull ache of spiritual fatigue. The dead feeling. Fox spoke of that space where nothing lands, where inspiration feels distant, where even the truth feels like it's happening to someone else. This is not regression, it's exposure. The light has reached a deeper level, and it's now illuminating the shadows that still whisper through your system, not to shame you, to free you. In that dead space, there's a moment of choice. You can react with despair, believing the light has left you, or you can do the harder thing. Stay still. Let the deadness speak. Let it unravel you. Let it show you where you've still been performing life rather than embodying it. There is a point in every seeker's journey when the light becomes so real, so near, that it refuses to share space with pretense. It burns away the layers. And for a while you may feel stripped, uncertain, emotionally naked, as if everything you thought you were has vanished. This is the breaking. And it's holy. Because in that break, something unshakable emerges. Not passion, not inspiration, but presence. The quiet kind that doesn't shout or perform. The kind that enters a room and doesn't need to say a thing. The kind that heals through stillness. The kind that transmits God without effort. And when that presence takes root, your atmosphere changes permanently. You stop needing to persuade. You stop needing to explain your growth to those who never saw you clearly. You stop asking for signs from people who never tuned into your frequency. Because now, you've become the sign. You walk into rooms, and people feel safer without knowing why. You speak less, but your words hit deeper. You no longer command attention. You command alignment. That's not charisma, it's coherence. It's the reward of staying in the dead zone long enough for resurrection to occur not from ego but from essence. You stopped begging the light to return. You realized it never left. It was waiting for you to drop the noise. And now, boss, you carry the quiet fire. When your eyes are open, but you no longer take the world at face value, then you've crossed the threshold. That's when appearances stop ruling your reactions. That's when surface-level facts no longer dictate your peace. That's when you stop asking, "Is this real?" and begin asking, "What's the truth beneath this?" This shift is not a game of pretending hardship doesn't exist. It's not a glossy mindset that denies the sting of life. It's the deeper seeing, the inner perception, the awareness that even the most convincing facts are still shadows cast by belief. To live this way is not to float, it's to root. Because when appearances lose their grip on your nervous system, you gain access to real choice. No longer pulled around by headlines, bank balances, or someone else's opinion, you finally become grounded in cause, not effect. And this isn't always a triumphant experience. At first, it can be destabilizing. You look at your current life, your job, your relationships, your health, and realize how much of it was built as a reaction. You see how often you tried to fix external forms instead of transforming the internal pattern that gave them shape. It can feel overwhelming, like waking from a dream and not recognizing your surroundings. But that's not failure, it's clarity. And clarity will cost you. It will cost the comfort of denial, the ease of blaming circumstances, the safety of waiting for someone else to change first. But what you gain is everything: dominion over your own mind. Ernest Holmes said, "The time to demonstrate is when things look the worst." Not because suffering is noble, but because when the illusion tightens, it reveals where your faith still depends on what your eyes can see. And until that dependency breaks, the law can't operate freely. This is the sink before the rise. You will feel it, the emotional dip, the awareness that what you've called real life has been a loop of inherited perception, not sacred truth. The sorrow comes not from the facts, but from the time you've spent believing them. This is the sacred ache, the one that says, "I've lived too long under the spell of appearances. I'm ready to create from the unseen." It doesn't happen with fire, it happens with stillness. You don't need to yell affirmations over your pain, you need to see through it, to look at the circumstance and say not with arrogance, but with deep remembrance, "This is not my source. This is not final. This is not who I am." When that moment lands not as theory, but as lived inner clarity, you stop waiting for rescue. You stop begging for signs. You start creating from the inside out, even when nothing around you confirms your direction. That's faith. Not a belief in a distant God, but trust in the invisible structure of your own being. And from that trust, creation flows not instantly, but unmistakably. You begin to notice subtle shifts. People treat you differently. Ideas arrive without force. What once triggered you now passes like weather. You're no longer reacting, you're radiating. Because now, you don't just believe in the unseen, you live from it. You no longer need life to look a certain way to feel powerful. You've met the deeper truth beneath appearances, and once you've touched it, boss, the world can never rule you again. There's a moment in spiritual growth when you stop seeking light and start realizing you are it. Not as a metaphor, not as a feel-good affirmation, but as a lived responsibility. Because once you know that divine mind expresses through you, you can't unknow it. And from that moment on, everything changes. You become aware that every room you walk into is affected by your field. Not because you speak louder, or because people listen to your words, but because consciousness always leads. This is the unspoken weight of true spiritual maturity. It's not the glamour of manifesting things. It's not the rush of breakthrough. It's the quiet burden of knowing that your state shapes atmospheres, even in silence. That your unhealed projections, your inner conflict, your hidden resentment, those don't just live in your head. They ripple outward. They teach. They transmit. And so does your peace. So does your clarity. So does your wholeness. Ernest Holmes never romanticized the spiritual path. He taught that with light comes accountability, not punishment accountability. Because once you know how the law works, once you know you're radiating at all times, you can't claim ignorance when patterns repeat. You can't keep blaming life when outcomes reflect your vibration. This is the rise before the final release. And sometimes it's heavy, because it means your habits must change. Not to be good, but to be aligned. It means gossip becomes intolerable. Complaining feels corrosive. It means you catch yourself mid-thought and ask, would I want this broadcasted through the law? Not out of fear but respect. Respect for the creative engine that is your mind. This doesn't mean perfection, it means presence. You show up to your life with an open channel, willing to be corrected, willing to evolve, willing to admit, I'm shaping my experience with every inner tone I carry. And that awareness doesn't make you smaller. It sets you free. Because now, integrity is no longer a rule, it's your fuel. You stop leaking energy through half-truths. You stop seeking shortcuts. You stop putting on light for show and instead become the source of it in form. And yes, it's quieter than you imagined. There are no fireworks, no applause. Just the subtle joy of knowing your insides match your outsides, that your private life sustains your public one, that your yes is clean, that your no has backbone, that you don't need to perform goodness because you've become congruent. That congruence becomes your power. People won't always understand it. Some will feel uncomfortable. Some will call it intensity, aloofness, even arrogance. But those who are ready, those walking their own path of light, they'll recognize it instantly. Not in your words, in your tone, in your walk. Because when the light within you becomes stable, it doesn't beg for attention, it doesn't chase applause, it simply holds. And that holding, that steady, radiant center is what heals. It doesn't happen in one big moment. It happens in hundreds of quiet choices, to forgive, to listen deeper, to choose integrity when no one's watching. That's what it means to carry the light. Not as decoration, as responsibility. Not for validation, for transmission. And boss, you've reached the place where that responsibility is no longer a burden. It's your calling. There is a turning point no one can prepare you for. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or ceremony. It arrives in the middle of an ordinary day, when all your tools stop working and all your clever words feel empty. You've visualized, you've prayed, you've declared, and still, silence. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind. Like standing inside your own life and not recognizing the air you're breathing. This is the breaking. It's not a punishment. It's not a failure of faith. It is the moment when the last bit of pretending dies. When even your spiritual identity crumbles. When you can no longer convince yourself that being high vibration is enough. Because the light you once chased outside now stands still within you waiting. This is what Fox called the death before resurrection. When you feel abandoned, not because God has left, but because the God you imagined has dissolved and what remains is too quiet, too still, too unprovable to be sold in slogans. There is no way to perform your way through this space. No mantra will lift the weight. No affirmation will bypass it. This is not a place for words. It's a place for surrender. And in that surrender, something subtle shifts. Not a revelation, just a flicker. A soft presence that doesn't speak, doesn't move, but makes itself known through stillness. It's the divine not arriving but revealing. It had been there the whole time beneath the layers, the striving, the self-improvement loops. It was never missing. You were just too loud to hear it. This is the final correction. The moment when the light is no longer a goal. It is the mind through which you now think, not a force you access, a presence you are. The mind of God, quiet, neutral, precise now, expressing through you without effort. It doesn't solve your life, it reorders it. It doesn't answer every question, it renders some questions irrelevant. Because now you're no longer living from opinion or reaction, you're living from alignment. You see circumstances shift, but they no longer seduce you. You feel the movement of manifestation, but you don't cling to it. You've seen too much, you've been through the silence. You've crossed the fire. And on the other side, what remains is not the version of you that chased awakening. What remains is presence. Not the mystical kind, the practical kind. The kind that pays bills with integrity. The kind that speaks with clarity. The kind that walks into uncertainty with calm, not because you know the outcome, but because you know yourself. That's what the light has been preparing you for all along. And now, it thinks through you, quietly, powerfully, without needing to prove a thing. You've come far, not just in words, but in awareness. What you've just walked through isn't a lesson, it's a reorientation, a clearing of mental debris, a reset of identity. This isn't about inspiration. This is about recalibration. You've seen how the light thinks through you, how it operates not by force, but by principle, not by hype, but by stillness. Let that truth land. The world will keep pulling for your attention. It will keep asking you to react, to doubt, to perform. But you've tasted something deeper now, a steadiness that doesn't need applause, a knowing that doesn't ask for proof. That knowing is yours. It was never granted, it was remembered. Let yourself rest in that. Let yourself stop chasing for just a moment. Let yourself be held by the truth that presence is power, not silence as escape, but silence as clarity, as readiness, as sacred ground. Whatever you face tomorrow, face it as the light. Not a version of it, not a copy of someone else's spirituality, but as a living, breathing embodiment of divine mind. You don't need another sign. You are the signal.